No one is going to believe you, Sarah. Jason Mitchell didn't raise his voice when he said it. He didn't have to. The confidence in his smile carried farther than a shout ever could. The words drifted across the courtroom and settled between them like something heavy and permanent. Sarah Mitchell looked at him from the opposite table and said nothing. Outside, the gray October sky hung low over downtown Chicago. Inside courtroom 4B, the fluorescent lights cast a pale glow across polished wood, legal pads, and rows of occupied seats. A clerk arranged documents near the judge's bench. Someone coughed softly in the gallery. A pen clicked twice somewhere behind Sarah. The ordinary sounds felt strangely loud. Jason leaned back in his chair as if he were exactly where he belonged. His navy suit looked expensive. His silver watch reflected the overhead lights each time he moved his wrist. To anyone watching, he appeared calm, successful, and completely in control. Sarah knew that image well. For 12 years she had watched him build it. She had watched him perfect it. She had watched people believe it. The bailiff stepped toward the center of the room and announced that court would begin shortly. Conversations faded. Chairs shifted. A nervous energy moved through the audience. Sarah folded her hands in her lap and focused on breathing evenly. She could feel the cool air from the vent above her. She could hear the faint hum of the projector mounted near the rear wall. She noticed details because looking at details was easier than looking at Jason. Across the aisle, Jason exchanged a confident nod with his attorney. They looked prepared. They looked relaxed. They looked like people expecting good news. Jason's attorney whispered something that made him smirk. A few seats behind him, two observers quietly glanced in Sarah's direction before returning their attention to him. Sarah recognized the look immediately. Doubt. She had seen it for months. Ever since the divorce proceedings began, Jason had told the same story to anyone willing to listen. He told it with certainty. He told it with precision. Most importantly, he told it first. And people usually believed the first version they heard. The courtroom doors opened again. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered from a side hallway, and everyone stood. The room instantly fell silent. The judge took her seat. Papers were organized. Names were confirmed. Procedures began. Everything moved with the measured rhythm of a process older than anyone present. Yet beneath that rhythm, tension quietly grew. Jason sat straighter when the hearing officially started. He looked toward the judge with the confidence of someone who believed facts could be arranged like furniture. Sarah remained silent. Her attorney, Rebecca Hayes, reviewed a folder without displaying the slightest emotion. No dramatic gestures. No urgent whispers. No visible concern. Jason noticed that too. His smile widened almost imperceptibly. He interpreted her calm as weakness. He interpreted Sarah's silence as surrender. As the first statements began, sunlight briefly pushed through the clouds outside and streaked across the courtroom windows. For a moment, the room brightened. Then the light disappeared again. Jason never noticed. He was too busy preparing to tell his story. And he had no idea that before this hearing was over, every carefully chosen word would matter. The first witness called that morning was Jason Mitchell. He rose smoothly from his chair, adjusted the sleeve of his suit, and walked toward the witness stand with the confidence of a man entering a meeting he expected to control. The clerk administered the oath. Jason answered clearly. His voice carried across the courtroom without hesitation. Then he settled into the chair and folded his hands. From the gallery, he looked exactly like the kind of person juries trusted and neighbors admired. Judge Eleanor Brooks glanced down at her notes. Rebecca Hayes sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Sarah remained motionless beside her. The hearing moved forward. Questions were asked. Jason answered each one without pausing. It was almost impressive. Every response seemed polished. Every detail seemed organized. He described himself as a devoted husband who had spent years trying to save a failing marriage. He spoke about patience. He spoke about sacrifice. He spoke about disappointment. He painted a picture so carefully that it almost felt rehearsed. A few people in the gallery nodded as they listened. Sarah noticed. She also noticed something else. Jason never looked at her while he testified. Not once. Instead, he kept his attention on the judge and occasionally on his own attorney. It was a small detail, but she remembered that about him. When he wanted people to believe him, he focused on the audience, never the person who knew the truth. His attorney guided him through a timeline of the marriage. 12 years reduced to a sequence of dates and statements. Jason described financial disagreements. He described communication problems. He described growing apart. Each answer positioned him as reasonable and responsible. By the time he finished discussing the final year of the marriage, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had shifted noticeably. The narrative felt simple. A struggling marriage. A husband trying his best. A wife who could not move on. Rebecca continued taking notes without expression. Her pen moved steadily across the page. Sarah could not see what she was writing. Across the room, Jason's confidence continued to grow. It showed in the way he sat back after each answer. It showed in the faint smile that appeared whenever an objection was overruled. It showed in the relaxed posture of his attorney, who seemed pleased with the direction of the hearing. Then the conversation turned to the months immediately before the divorce. Jason leaned slightly forward. For the first time all morning, he appeared energized. He spoke in greater detail. He described difficult conversations. He described accusations he claimed were false. He described what he called misunderstandings. Every answer pushed the same message. Sarah was mistaken. Sarah was emotional. Sarah remembered things incorrectly. The strategy was subtle but effective. No dramatic claims. No obvious attacks. Just a slow, steady effort to make her seem unreliable. Another observer in the gallery glanced toward Sarah. This time the look carried something more than doubt. It carried sympathy for Jason. Exactly what he wanted. Sarah clasped her hands tighter. Beneath the table. Not because she was surprised. Because she recognized the pattern. For years, Jason had won arguments before they even started. He understood how stories worked. He understood how first impressions worked. Most of all, he understood that people often trusted confidence more than truth. As the hearing continued, the courtroom seemed to lean further in his direction. And sitting in the witness stand beneath the seal of the court, Jason looked like a man who believed he was only a few steps away from victory. The longer Jason remained on the witness stand, the stronger his version of reality seemed to become. Confidence had a strange effect on people. It smoothed rough edges. It filled gaps. It made uncertainty sound like fact. By late morning, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B felt noticeably different from when the hearing had begun. Several observers leaned forward whenever Jason spoke. They followed his testimony closely. They listened as if they were hearing the complete story. Sarah sat quietly beside Rebecca Hayes and watched it happen one answer at a time. Jason described the final months of the marriage with remarkable certainty. He claimed every major conflict had been started by Sarah. He claimed every difficult conversation had been exaggerated. Whenever a question touched on an uncomfortable subject, he answered immediately, never allowing silence to linger long enough for doubt to appear. The strategy worked. His responses sounded natural. Practiced, but natural. At one point, his attorney asked whether he had ever attempted to intimidate Sarah during the separation process. Jason shook his head before the question was even finished. Absolutely not, he said. The answer came so quickly that it almost sounded automatic. His attorney nodded and moved forward. Another question followed. Had he ever threatened her financially? No. Had he ever attempted to manipulate the outcome of the divorce proceedings? No. Had he ever pressured her into changing statements or withholding information? No. Each denial arrived faster than the last. Sarah lowered her eyes toward the table. Not because she felt defeated. Because she recognized something familiar. Jason always became more confident when people believed him. And confidence often made him careless. Judge Brooks listened carefully without interrupting. Occasionally she wrote notes in the margin of a document. The scratching sound of her pen seemed unusually loud during the brief pauses between questions. Rebecca remained calm. She organized papers. Marked pages with colored tabs. Adjusted a legal pad. Nothing about her behavior suggested urgency. Across the room, Jason appeared increasingly comfortable. His shoulders relaxed. His smile surfaced more often. He had reached the point where he was no longer simply answering questions. He was enjoying himself. Then his attorney guided him into a new section of testimony. The focus shifted toward a series of conversations that had taken place shortly before the divorce filing. Jason described them as civil, respectful, brief. According to him, there had been no pressure, no hostility, no attempts to influence Sarah's decisions. He stated it clearly. Then he repeated it. The repetition seemed intentional. As though he wanted the courtroom to remember those particular words. A woman seated near the back of the gallery slowly nodded while listening. Another observer crossed his arms and glanced toward Sarah with visible skepticism. The shift was impossible to miss now. Jason's story was winning. Even the room itself seemed to reflect it. The tension that had filled the courtroom earlier was fading. The outcome felt increasingly predictable. Sarah noticed Rebecca place a small check mark beside one line in her notes. Nothing else changed. No dramatic reaction. No whisper. Just a single mark on a page. Meanwhile, Jason continued speaking. He described himself as transparent, honest, cooperative. Every answer reinforced the same image. Every answer made him appear more credible. And with every confident denial, he unknowingly moved closer to a mistake he had not realized he was making. Because somewhere beneath the polished testimony, hidden beneath the certainty and the carefully constructed narrative, one small detail remained exactly where he had left it months ago. Waiting. Waiting was always harder than speaking. Sarah had learned that during the final year of her marriage. Silence left room for doubt. Silence gave other people time to create their own conclusions. Yet as she sat beside Rebecca Hayes and listened to Jason continue his testimony, she resisted every urge to react. The hearing paused briefly before noon. Court staff moved quietly through the room. Several people stood and stretched. Others stepped into the hallway. Jason remained near the witness stand, speaking casually with his attorney. He looked relaxed. Almost cheerful. The confidence surrounding him had become contagious. Even people who knew very little about the case seemed drawn toward his version of events. Sarah watched through the corner of her eye as one observer shook Jason's hand during the break. The gesture lasted only a second, but it said everything. People believed him. Rebecca closed a folder and leaned back in her chair. Her expression remained unreadable. She did not appear concerned. She did not appear encouraged either. She simply looked patient. Sarah had noticed that same expression during preparation meetings over the previous several months. Whenever the case became complicated, Rebecca seemed to grow quieter rather than louder. The bailiff announced that court would resume in 5 minutes. People returned to their seats. Papers shuffled. Water bottles were opened. The familiar sounds filled the room again. Sarah glanced toward the windows overlooking the city. The clouds had thickened. A light rain had started falling over the streets below. Tiny droplets streaked across the glass. For a moment, the gray skyline reminded her of another day months earlier. A Thursday evening in March. Cold rain. Heavy traffic. A parking garage several blocks from her apartment. She remembered sitting inside her car with the engine running. She remembered staring at her phone. She remembered reading a message from Jason for the third time because she could not believe what it said. The memory surfaced unexpectedly and disappeared just as quickly. Back in the courtroom, Jason had returned to the witness stand. He adjusted the microphone slightly and resumed answering questions. Sarah noticed the same pattern continue. Every answer sounded smooth. Every explanation arrived neatly packaged. The rough edges had vanished from his story. The uncomfortable details had disappeared. Entire conversations seemed to have been rewritten into something cleaner and easier to defend. Then another memory drifted back. This one from late spring. The divorce process had already begun. Jason had insisted on meeting face to face. He claimed he wanted to settle matters peacefully. He claimed he wanted closure. Sarah remembered the location perfectly. A private corner table near the back of a downtown restaurant. She remembered the soft jazz music playing overhead. She remembered condensation sliding down the side of a glass of iced tea. Most of all, she remembered one specific moment. A moment so small that Jason likely forgot it before the evening ended. A brief glance toward a nearby wall. A slight change in his tone. A comment that seemed insignificant at the time. Sarah had not understood why the memory stayed with her. Not then. Not for weeks afterward. Yet somehow it remained. Like a loose thread that refused to disappear. Judge Brooks called for the next phase of testimony. Jason sat taller in his chair. The hearing was moving exactly where he wanted it to go. His confidence had become visible now. It appeared in every gesture. Every smile. Every answer. Across the room, Rebecca quietly opened another folder. Inside was a single page marked with a yellow tab. She looked at it for only a second before closing the folder again. Jason never noticed. He was too busy enjoying what looked increasingly like victory. After nearly an hour on the witness stand, Jason had settled into a rhythm that seemed impossible to disrupt. Every answer arrived quickly. Every explanation sounded reasonable. The hearing no longer felt like a contest. It felt like confirmation. Confirmation that his version of events would become the official one. Even the room appeared to move with him now. Heads nodded occasionally. Pens stopped scratching when he spoke. People listened. More importantly, they believed. Rebecca Hayes finally rose from her chair. The movement drew attention. Immediately. Jason looked toward her with the calm expression of someone expecting a routine cross-examination. He folded his hands and waited. Rebecca approached slowly, carrying only a legal pad and a single folder. There was nothing dramatic about her presence. No stack of binders. No hurried energy. Just quiet preparation. She stopped several feet from the witness stand and glanced briefly at her notes. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice steady, I only have a few questions. Jason smiled faintly. Of course. Rebecca nodded. You testified earlier that every conversation between you and Sarah during the separation process remained respectful. Yes. And you stand by that statement today? Absolutely. Rebecca made a note. The courtroom remained silent. Jason appeared completely relaxed. The question seemed harmless. Then came another. You also testified that you never attempted to pressure Sarah into changing any position related to the divorce proceedings. That is correct. Again, Rebecca wrote something down. Jason glanced toward his attorney. The attorney gave a subtle nod of approval. Everything appeared to be going well. Rebecca looked up. At any point during the separation, did you ever make statements intended to influence Sarah's willingness to pursue legal action? No. The answer arrived instantly. Never? Rebecca asked. Never. Jason leaned back slightly after speaking. Confidence radiated from him. To him, these were easy questions. Questions he had already answered. Questions that reinforced the image he had spent months building. Rebecca paused. Not long enough to create suspicion. Just long enough to make the next question feel different. Did there ever come a time when you suggested that challenging your version of events would create consequences for Sarah? Jason barely hesitated. No. You are certain? 100%. The answer echoed through the courtroom. Sarah remained perfectly still. She stared at the edge of the table in front of her. Across the room, Judge Brooks watched carefully. The judge's pen rested motionless above a notepad now. Rebecca continued. So to be clear, under oath, your testimony today is that you never pressured Sarah, never intimidated Sarah, and never attempted to influence her statements regarding this case. Jason straightened in his seat. That is correct. And there are no exceptions to that answer? None. Rebecca slowly closed the folder in her hands. The gesture seemed insignificant. Yet Sarah noticed it immediately. Something about it felt deliberate. Across the room, Jason's confidence had reached its highest point. The questions had not challenged him. They had given him another opportunity to repeat his story. Another opportunity to strengthen it. Another opportunity to sound convincing. He believed he had passed every test. What he did not realize was that Rebecca had not been searching for answers. She had been collecting commitments. One statement after another. One certainty after another. Building them carefully. Like pieces placed into position before the first move of a much larger game. Rebecca returned to counsel table and sat down without another word. The silence that followed felt unusual. Most cross-examinations built toward confrontation. This one seemed to be drifting nowhere. Jason clearly noticed it. His confidence grew even stronger. He adjusted his tie and glanced briefly toward the gallery. Several people were watching him with open interest now. The attention appeared to energize him. Judge Brooks reviewed a few pages in front of her before looking up again. Ms. Hayes, do you have additional questions? Rebecca stood. Just a few more, Your Honor. She approached the witness stand once again. Her pace remained unhurried. Her expression remained neutral. Jason looked completely comfortable. Whatever concern he might have felt earlier had vanished. Mr. Mitchell, Rebecca said, I would like to revisit one specific period of time. Certainly. The spring before the divorce filing. Jason nodded. All right. Rebecca glanced at a note. During that period, did you meet with Sarah on multiple occasions? Yes. Were those meetings voluntary? They were. Did you choose the locations? Sometimes. Rebecca nodded as if confirming routine information. Then she looked up. One of those meetings occurred at a restaurant in downtown Chicago. Jason answered immediately. Yes. Do you remember the meeting? Of course. Would you describe the conversation as calm? Yes. Respectful? Yes. Friendly? Jason smiled slightly. As friendly as circumstances allowed. A few quiet chuckles drifted through the room. Even Judge Brooks appeared relaxed. Rebecca continued writing notes. During that meeting, did you make any statements intended to influence Sarah's decisions regarding the divorce? No. Any statements intended to pressure her? No. Any statements intended to discourage her from pursuing legal action? No. The answers arrived effortlessly. Sarah watched without moving. Rebecca's questions still seemed ordinary. Perhaps even repetitive. Jason certainly thought so. His body language reflected complete confidence. Every answer reinforced the testimony he had already given. Every denial made him appear more certain. Then Rebecca paused. Not dramatically. Just long enough to shift the rhythm. Mr. Mitchell, are you aware that this court places significant weight on truthful testimony? Yes. And you understand that your statements today are being made under oath? I do. So there is no possibility that you are mistaken regarding your answers? Jason leaned forward slightly. The smile returned. No possibility. Rebecca nodded. You are completely certain? Yes. Absolutely certain? Absolutely. Sarah noticed something changed then. Not in Jason. In the room. The atmosphere felt tighter somehow. The earlier casual energy had faded. Even people in the gallery seemed more attentive now. Rebecca closed her legal pad and looked directly at the witness stand. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. For a brief moment Jason appeared confused. The examination felt unfinished. The questions had led nowhere. No contradiction. No challenge. No surprise. Just a series of confirmations. Across the courtroom, his attorney looked pleased. The hearing appeared to be ending exactly as expected. Jason had remained consistent. Sarah had remained silent. Nothing significant had happened. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. Rebecca no longer needed additional answers. She had every answer she came for. Every denial. Every certainty. Every commitment. The foundation was complete. And for the first time all day, Sarah noticed Rebecca gently slide one specific folder to the top of the stack on her desk. Rebecca remained standing. The folder stayed in her hand for several seconds before she finally looked toward the judge. Your Honor, at this time I would like permission to introduce Exhibit 47 into evidence. The request sounded ordinary. Almost administrative. Yet something about it caused the room to grow still. Judge Brooks glanced toward the opposing counsel. Jason's attorney frowned slightly. It was the first sign of uncertainty Sarah had seen all day. Any objection? The judge asked. Jason's attorney hesitated. Only briefly. No objection, Your Honor. Granted. Rebecca nodded. Thank you. She walked to the counsel table and opened the folder that had remained untouched for most of the hearing. Jason watched her calmly. Whatever Exhibit 47 was, he clearly did not view it as a threat. He sat comfortably in the witness stand, one arm resting against the chair. The confidence that had carried him through the entire day remained intact. A court clerk approached and accepted a small storage device from Rebecca. The clerk moved toward the courtroom technology station near the sidewall. Several people in the gallery shifted in their seats. Sarah noticed the movement immediately. Curiosity had replaced certainty. For the first time all afternoon, nobody seemed completely sure what would happen next. The clerk connected the device. A monitor near the witness stand flickered to life. Another screen mounted along the courtroom wall illuminated seconds later. The faint hum of the equipment filled the silence. Jason's attention followed the screens. His expression remained relaxed. Rebecca returned to her place beside Sarah but did not sit down. She looked toward the judge. Your Honor, before the exhibit is presented, I would like to confirm one final point. Judge Brooks nodded. Proceed. Rebecca turned toward the witness stand. Mr. Mitchell, you testified under oath today that you never attempted to pressure Sarah Mitchell regarding this case. Correct. You testified that you never attempted to influence her decisions through intimidation. Correct. And you testified there are absolutely no exceptions to those statements. Jason answered without hesitation. That is correct. Rebecca held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Thank you. No further clarification needed. Something changed then. It was small. Almost invisible. But Sarah saw it. Jason's smile faded slightly. Not because he suddenly understood. Because for the first time all day, he did not understand. The rhythm of the hearing had shifted. The certainty that had protected him began to weaken. Judge Brooks looked toward the clerk. You may proceed. The clerk pressed a key. The screens turned black for a moment. A timestamp appeared in the lower corner. The image had not started yet. Only the opening frame was visible. Sarah recognized the location immediately. Her pulse quickened. Across the room, Jason stared at the screen. His eyes narrowed slightly. The confidence was still there. But now it was sharing space with something else. Recognition. The room became completely silent. No papers moved. No chairs shifted. Even the rain tapping softly against the windows seemed distant. Every eye in courtroom 4B focused on the screen. And for the first time since he had taken the witness stand, Jason Mitchell stopped looking like a man who was winning. The screen remained frozen for a fraction of a second before the recording began. The image sharpened. A date appeared in the corner. March. Several months before the divorce filing. The location was immediately recognizable to Sarah. A downtown restaurant. Warm lighting. Small tables. A quiet weekday evening. The camera angle came from a security system mounted high near the ceiling. There was no dramatic soundtrack. No special effect. Just reality preserved exactly as it happened. Jason appeared on the screen first. He was seated at a corner table. Moments later, Sarah entered the frame and sat across from him. Neither of them looked toward the camera. Neither seemed aware it existed. The courtroom watched in complete silence. At first, nothing appeared unusual. The two figures spoke calmly. Menus rested on the table. Glasses reflected soft light from overhead fixtures. Jason's attorney relaxed slightly. Perhaps this was all Rebecca had. An ordinary conversation. Then audio began playing through the courtroom speakers. Clear. Undistorted. Impossible to misunderstand. Sarah listened without moving. She had heard the recording before. Months earlier, when Rebecca first obtained it. Yet hearing it inside the courtroom felt different. Heavier. More final. On the screen, Jason leaned forward and spoke. His tone was calm. Controlled. Almost friendly. The words themselves seemed harmless at first. Then the conversation continued. Piece by piece. Sentence by sentence. The image people had accepted throughout the hearing began to crack. Jason was no longer describing events. He was directing them. Advising Sarah on what she should say. Explaining what would happen if she challenged his version of the story. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Brooks did not interrupt. Rebecca did not speak. Nobody needed to. The recording spoke for itself. Then came the moment Sarah remembered. The reason the conversation had stayed with her for months. On the screen, Jason glanced briefly toward the restaurant wall where a small security camera was mounted. The glance lasted less than a second. Then he returned his attention to the table. He smiled. A confident smile. The smile of someone who believed he was controlling the outcome. And then he said it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Calmly. Deliberately. He explained that if Sarah continued pursuing certain claims, nobody would believe her. He explained that he knew how to present events in a way that favored him. He explained that credibility mattered more than truth. Every word echoed through courtroom 4B. Sarah did not need to look toward the witness stand. The reaction around her told the story. Someone in the gallery shifted abruptly in their seat. Another observer lowered a notebook. The atmosphere had transformed completely. Jason's attorney stared at the screen without speaking. Judge Brooks watched with an expression that had become noticeably harder. The recording continued. And then the final piece appeared. Jason discussed future testimony. Not specific testimony. Not exact statements. Something more damaging. Strategy. He spoke about consistency. About sticking to a narrative. About making certain claims impossible to challenge. The words were careful enough to avoid sounding criminal. Yet they directly contradicted what he had spent the entire afternoon denying. The video ended. The screen turned black. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence that followed felt larger than the courtroom itself. For hours, Jason's story had controlled the room. In less than 10 minutes, the room had stopped believing it. The silence lasted several long seconds after the screen went dark. Nobody rushed to fill it. There was nothing left to explain. The evidence had already done that. Judge Eleanor Brooks looked down at her notes, then toward the witness stand. Jason remained seated, but the confidence that had carried him through the entire hearing was gone. His posture had changed. His expression had changed. Even the way he held his hands had changed. Across the courtroom, people who had spent the afternoon listening to his story were now looking at him differently. Not with admiration. Not with trust. With questions. Rebecca Hayes remained standing beside her table. She did not celebrate. She did not deliver a dramatic speech. She simply waited. The facts were already in the room. The facts did not need help. Jason's attorney requested a brief recess. The request was granted. Court staff moved quietly. The gallery buzzed with hushed conversations. Yet even during the break, one thing never changed. Nobody questioned what they had just seen. Sarah sat calmly in her chair. For months she had imagined this moment. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wanted humiliation. She had simply wanted the truth to exist somewhere other than inside her own memory. Now it did. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere felt completely different. Earlier, every answer from Jason had strengthened his position. Now every answer from earlier in the day seemed to linger in the room beside him. Judge Brooks reviewed the testimony and the evidence that had been presented. Her words were measured. Professional. Careful. Yet the direction was unmistakable. Credibility mattered. Consistency mattered. Truth mattered. And when testimony conflicted with objective evidence, the evidence carried greater weight. Jason stared ahead without speaking. The man who had spent hours controlling the narrative now had nothing left to add. The hearing moved toward its conclusion. Rulings were issued. Findings were entered into the record. Several of the arguments that had appeared strongest only a few hours earlier suddenly carried very little value. The shift was not dramatic. It was final. Sarah listened quietly as the process unfolded. When everything ended, people began gathering documents and closing folders. Chairs moved. Conversations resumed. The ordinary sounds of the courthouse returned. Rebecca placed a hand lightly on Sarah's shoulder and offered a small smile. It was not the smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who knew the truth had finally been heard. Sarah thanked her and collected her belongings. Then she stood. Across the room, Jason remained seated for a moment longer. Their eyes met briefly. No anger. No argument. No final confrontation. Just a moment. Then Sarah turned away. She walked through the courtroom doors and into the hallway beyond. The rain had stopped outside. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the courthouse windows and stretched across the polished floor. People passed by carrying files and coffee cups, unaware of what had just happened inside courtroom 4B. Sarah stepped toward the exit and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. Behind her, a story built on confidence had collapsed under the weight of a few recorded minutes. Ahead of her, there was no audience to convince and no argument left to win. The truth had arrived on its own. And in the end, that was all she had ever needed.